DOE CSGF Fellow Sarah Elliott in the field of computational chemistry at the University of Georgia.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Elliott. I just graduated from the University of Georgia. I'm an outgoing fellow now. I'll be talking to you guys about a project I actually started on my practicum at Argonne National Lab. And I just really enjoyed the project, so I stayed on it all this time. And so that is that we've been developing a program to automate computational thermochemistry and kinetics right now for combustion applications. And so when we talk about computational chemistry in terms of combustion, there's kind of three main areas, and they're all based on the properties computed with quantum chemistry. So quantum chemistry is centered around taking what we call the Born-Oppenheimer approximation that lets us separate the timescales for the motions of a molecule's electrons and its nuclei. So then we can set the atoms in one position and solve for the electronic structure of the molecule there. And we do that with the Schrodinger equation. And the Schrodinger equation is the equation in quantum chemistry. It's an eigenvalue equation that lets us solve for the electronic energy and the wave function of a molecule. The wave function is the probability of finding an electron at any given point in space. And so the Hamiltonian for that talks about the kinetic energies of the electrons in the nuclei, the repulsive energy between its electrons and its nuclear repulsion energy, and the attraction between the electrons and the nuclei. And so that becomes a very big equation very quickly. And so quantum chemistry has built up a lot of mathematical models taking different levels of approximation in order to solve for this. So during the talk, when I talk about comparing different quantum chemistry methods, I'm talking about different ways we solve for this. But then once we have the electronic energy at one atomic position, we can move our atoms about and solve for the electronic energy again. And so then the energy relative to atom position is our potential energy surface. And we can solve for the fundamental properties of a molecule by finding where we have a minimum along that potential energy surface and finding the rotational constants there, and then finding the energy derivatives with respect to atomic position in order to get things like frequencies. Now, thermochemistry is based all about this partition function, and that tells us the number of states that are accessible to a molecule at a given temperature by putting energy levels into Boltzmann factors. And those energy levels we get from the quantum chemistry. That's the vibrational energy levels, so the electronic energy levels, rotational energy levels. And we often consider the partition function separable. All of the energetic degrees of freedom are separable. But then when we take temperature derivatives of that partition function, we get thermochemical properties like enthalpies, entropies, heat capacities, and free energies. And then kinetics is based all upon partition functions as well, but we need to have a dividing surface between our reactants and our products that minimizes the reactive flux. So often we call this our transition state. And we find the minimum energy path from the reactants over the transition state to the products. And we can use canonical transition state theory in order to solve for rate constants. So there we have, again, our lovely partition function, as well as some of the energetics we got from quantum chemistry, and we can get our rate constants out. We can include pressure dependence by adding parameters for collisional frequency and energy transfer into a master equation, and get properties like branching ratios and merging temperatures. So that's kind of the background on computational chemistry. And I just kind of want to tell you the sorts of results we can get with it by talking about some projects I did at Georgia on the formal peroxy radical, which is an atmospheric molecule. We were able to sort out experimental discrepancies and frequencies using computational chemistry. And we were able to get energies with uncertainties of 0.1 kilocalorie a mole, which is the sort of uncertainty we're really aiming for when we move on to kinetics, because each factor of KT, so 0.6 kilocalorie a mole at room temperature, that translates to a factor of 2 uncertainty and a rate constant. So so we were well within what we call thermochemical accuracy, which is 1 kilocalorie a mole with this study, and well within the sort of uncertainty we'd hope to move on to kinetics with. I also did some studies on Kriege intermediates with grad students at University of Georgia. Kriege intermediates play a large role in the distribution of the atmosphere, and they've been a hot topic recently. But we were investigating 2 potential sinks, one being addition to ammonia, that's that first one here, and then one being the addition to methanol. So the addition to methanol, we were within experimental uncertainty with our rate constant at 1.2. And with the ammonia addition, there wasn't actually experimental findings when we published, but the following year they did come out and we were again within experimental findings. And so that shows you that we're doing this predictively, we're not tuning. And we can start actually predicting what rates will be for combustion systems before anyone studied them. The Kriege intermediate studies were also really exciting because a decade ago, being a factor of 10 from an experimental rate constant was considered good, and here we are, within their uncertainties. So really excited about that. And it's only possible because of how carefully we are dealing with these computations. Here I'm just showing the amount of computations we did to get the fundamental properties, the quantum chemistry, where the main kind of thing here is that we use the focal point approach. So all of these quantum chemistry methods are based upon basis sets that represent our atomic orbitals. And so these are just different sizes of basis sets, but we're able to extrapolate towards the complete basis set limit by doing a bunch of computations and towards high levels of electron correlation treatment. And then with the study that focused on frequencies, we did an anharmonic analysis with second order perturbation theory, where we do a bunch of computations to get higher order derivatives of the electronic energy with respect to atomic positions. And then once we moved on to the thermochemistry and the rates, the big thing that we did from what I showed you in that first slide was that rather than take the rigid rotor harmonic oscillator approximation where we say that all of those energetic degrees of freedom are fully separable, we see that when we have large amplitude modes, that approximation breaks down because of how the vibrational energy level feeds into the vibrational partition function. If we have a low frequency mode, it will blow up. And so what we do is we project that mode out from the Hessian, that second derivative matrix, and we instead build a torsional partition function by getting a torsional profile along that rotor where the rotor wasn't actually rigid, and that's why we had a large amplitude motion. So what you see from this is that we can get predictive rates, but it takes a lot of computations. This was hundreds of computations, for every reaction. And once we move on to combustion systems, for even a simple fuel, we'll have hundreds of species and thousands of reactions between those species. So it's just not feasible to treat them with this amount of care manually. And that's what motivated the group at Argonne to work on Automech. This is our automated program where it will handle and do all of these types of calculations automatically. So the overview is that we want to find all of the reactions in a combustion mechanism, given any fuel name, and be able to produce the thermochemical properties and the rate constants for it for more combustion modeling. So the first step towards that is getting a list of species and reactions. Our mechanism preparation we do through reaction mechanism generator at MIT. And we've also developed our own libraries, Automol and Mech Analyzer, that lets us represent all of the potential species and graph structure, and then investigate all the possible reaction sites and all of the possible species and see how all of them could, potentially react together to produce any meaningful products. then once we have the list of species that we think are important, we check our database. We have a big database that we've built and populated. We don't want to ever have to repeat a calculation. And if we don't have anything, then we do a conformer search, where first we translate a species name into a 3D molecule using classical force fields through OpenBabel. And then we will do an Monte Carlo sampling of all the potential coordinates and configurations to get a good starting geometry at all the potential wells, energetic minimum. And then for each of those, we will do a hindered rotor scan along all of the dihedral angles in order to find for sure the structures that we want to move on with. And then once we have those, we pair together all of the reaction sites in order to find our transition state. So we put a dummy atom at the reaction site to define new angles to scan over in order to find transition states. And we do that through our AutoMol and ES2KTP libraries and with KenBot developed at Sandia. So we have a list of species, right, that we go through and we say, hey, the formal radical in hydroperoxide, if we choose 2 reaction sites from there, we could end up with formaldehyde and hydroperoxyl radical. And those are the 2 reaction sites. We do all that sampling and geometry optimization to get structures for those molecules. And then we scan along those new coordinates we define with the dummy atom between those in order to find a transition state. Then that turns into a potential energy surface, and we have most of the information we need to model this reaction. Then some extra quantum computations we might do is get higher level geometries, higher level frequencies. We might do these extrapolation or composite techniques to get good electronic energies. We might do those anharmonic analyses and get higher level torsional energy profiles for that projection out of the partition function. And then some more niche themes is certain types of reactions might have a long range transition state between the reactants and the dividing surface, where especially for like addition reactions, there might be a pre-reactive complex. And if the dividing surface is more difficult to locate, we might do some calculations near the transition state in order to find, be able to perform like variational transition state calculations in the statistical mechanics block. Then we move on to there, and we transform all of those fundamental properties into thermochemistry with the partition function, using the master equation system solver program developed by Yuri Jurdevsky at Argonne National Lab, where that program is capable of doing all these special treatments that I've mentioned, like the one-dimensional hindered rotor analysis. And then we transform the data to the kind of industry standard NASA polynomials to report the thermochemistry and store it in our database. For kinetics, we can use canonical transition state, and we can include pressure dependence by getting Leonard-Jones parameters with 1D min, which is a program developed by Aaron Jasper at Argonne National Lab. And then we can use master equation system solver to solve the master equation for our rate constants, where one of the exciting things about MESS is that it's able to kind of look at the full picture for a potential energy surface. So rather than just look at a molecule to one set of products, we actually put everything that has the same stoichiometries that are connected on the same surface and look at how those reactions can compete with each other. So this is just one example. It's one of the early steps in butane oxidation. But yeah, so that's the overview of the program, and we've refactored it since my first practicum now. But before we refactored it, our first demonstration was with butane oxidation. Back then it was called PATChem. But for butane oxidation, there was 173 relevant species that the mechanism generator predicted. And we were able to produce thermochemical information for 95% of those in 100,000 CPU hours. So with the nodes we were using, that was about 2 weeks of our time. So we were really excited that we were able to get data for that many species. And we also, early on in the butane oxidation study, we realized that this could also be a powerful program for being able to compare methods against one another. And so we started doing some of that. These are just different methods here of getting the electronic energy. So now actually we're moving on to computing good data for core combustion species. So kind of the same small molecules end up showing up in every single combustion mechanism. And so you want to make sure that all of those are really good and reliable, and that everyone doing modeling is using good information. And so we're going to use Autochem to get data for all these core combustion species, up to 2 carbon oxygenated hydrocarbons, and also including nitrogen. And we've broken that into the larger set, 348 species, and then a smaller set, 150 species, that we're going to do some method comparisons with in order to choose how to do the bigger set. And so we did a sensitivity analysis with different quantum chemistry programs, and compared how they performed on different fundamental properties. So here's one example for frequencies. We had 410 experimental frequencies that we compared to, and we have this box plot of all the different methods we chose, and the percent error that those methods had on average from the experiment is in green here. And we see that the wave function method, where we extrapolated the complete basis set limit, performs very well for large frequencies here. We're just about 1% off from experimental frequencies, so that's really good. We see that some of the really common methods had large standard deviations or quartile ranges, and so we see the importance of actually looking at the data in terms of box plots and not just at average error. And we ended up choosing the B2-PLIP D3 functional, which is a more expensive DFT method, but it's a lot cheaper than the wave function-based methods. And we also see that when we move from the smaller basis set, this triple zeta basis set, to the quadruple zeta basis set, that we don't really see much improvement. And so it shows us that we can use the more affordable method for as we move on in our studies. We see that it compares really well against kind of the golden standard in quantum chemistry. And then we can see the sensitivity of the resulting thermochemistry once we transform those fundamental properties through the partition function. We end up seeing that where we have the biggest change is when we look at thermochemistry and how it changes with our hindered rotor treatment and with the anharmonicity, and not as much to the quantum chemistry method. So here I talked about before how we project a mode out of the partition function and then have a torsional profile and to have a separate torsional partition function. And there's different ways of doing that. We can do that with 1D rotors, where we will do 1 rotor at a time. We can stay on 2 rotors at a time and update the rotational constants as we do that to get multidimensional treatment. And then we can get adiabatic multidimensional treatment if we update the frequencies as well. And so that's what this plot here is. This is, right here we have the enthalpies at different temperatures using these different methods compared to the adiabatic multidimensional treatment. And we see that we have over 1 kilocalorie difference at 2000 K. And then when we look at harmonic versus anharmonic treatment, we have at 2000 K 2 kilocalories a mole difference. So we see that maybe if you're looking at room temperature, it doesn't matter to include anharmonicity. But if you're looking at combustion temperatures, it is important, and more important than using a really reliable quantum chemistry method, where there we had 0.3 kilocalories of difference. So we ended up choosing that B2-PLIP D3 CCPV-TZ method, as well as adiabatic multidimensional treatment and anharmonic treatment. And for these are the species that we could compare to the active thermochemical table database. And these are the heats of formation at 298 K. And we're really happy with these results because for all but 3% of the species, if we consider the uncertainty that we assume are built into our energies, which is about 0.2, 0.3 kilocalories per mole, as well as the uncertainties reported in the active thermochemical database, we are within that uncertainty for all but 3% of the species. And then finally, I'm going to talk quickly about the kinetics we can do with the program. So this is a study we're doing right now, initial stages of pyrolysis. So for ethane, propane, and butanol, and alcohols and aldehydes of that, we do initial abstraction with hydrogen, methyl, and hydroxyl radical, and then the initial decompositions after that through addition, isomerizations, and additional eliminations. And we see that just looking at in butanol, that potential energy surface is huge. It goes through a lot of different reactions. So we ended up studying over 200 reactions, and we compared 4 different methods for doing that, 4 different quantum chemistry methods. And again, we did this one-dimensional hindered rotor treatment in the partition function. And we, or actually Kevin Moore, a postdoc at Argonne National Lab, did a pretty extensive comparison against experimental rate constants, and found that in general, we were about a factor of, or within a factor of 1.3 from experimental rate constants. And so, so we had a 95% success rate over that in locating transition states for these 200 reactions. And once we had a transition state, we had about the same amount of luck finding a meaningful rate constant with it. So that's, in my opinion, really good progress for the program, because when you think of those studies that I showed you at the beginning, which were just a few reactions each, those took about 1 year of grad student time. And here we were able to generate over 200 rate constants in a few weeks with this program, and just being able to arbitrarily change the method and see what impact that has. It's been exciting to see where this program has gone. And now that we're just starting to get to reap what we've sown working this over the last 3 years on the program, it would be a shame to walk away. So the future work is that I'm going to be going to Argonne National Lab as a postdoc, and we're going to work on extending applications to atmospheric applications. We're going to work on making it robust, get that 95% to 100% hopefully, and keep adding more methods and better ways to scale to larger systems with good reliability. And so I'd like to thank my group at University of Georgia. It's been a great group to be a part of, although they always take group pictures when I'm away at Argonne. And I would like to thank the group at Argonne National Lab that I've been working with, Andres Kopin, Kevin Moore, Marat Kacelli, Yuri Drzeski, Aaron Jasper, and Stephen Klippenstein has been my practicum advisor all this time. And of course, I would like to thank the CSGF, not just for your financial contribution, which I do very much appreciate, but really the connections and the opportunities you have given me have completely changed what my research interests have been, and have given me this really fun project to work on, and I'm really grateful for that. And I don't know how the incoming CSGF students, how their practicum sessions are going to work and stuff, but hopefully you still get to meet with the labs, because the practicum was a really great experience for me, and I hope you have time to really pick out a great project for yourselves. But yeah, with that, I think we move live for questions. So see you in a second.